Council of the Great City Schools, and I want to welcome you once again to the 54th Annual Conference of the Great City Schools and to Hillsborough County, Florida, where we are having this town hall meeting on Black male achievement. The Council of the Great City Schools has just released a report on the status of and challenges of African American males in our urban communities. And with us today to moderate a panel on this important challenge in front of us is Byron Pitts from 60 Minutes. Byron Pitts was named a contributor and a member of the 60 Minutes staff and a chief national correspondent for CBS Evening News with Katie Couric in January of 2009. Mr. Pitts has reported on New Orleans. He has done war reporting in Afghanistan. He has covered the September 11 attacks. He has covered the invasion of Iraq. He has covered the military buildup of Kuwait, the Florida fires, the Elian Gonzalez story, the Florida presidential election recount, mudslides in Central America, and many other critical and important issues that have been covered in the news media over the last 20 years. He is a native of Baltimore, but he began his start at the CBS affiliates in Miami and Atlanta. He is the author of the book Step Out on Nothing, an inspirational autobiography chronicling his rise from a disadvantaged background. His other awards include recognition from the National Association of Black Journalists as Best Journalist of the Year in 2002, and he is recipient of 4 Associated Press Awards. Mr. Pitts was born in Baltimore, Maryland. He graduated from Ohio Wesleyan and has bachelor's degrees in journalism and speech communications. He lives now in New Jersey. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Byron Pitts.
Better? There we go. Okay, well, the good news is I'm Baptist, so if I had to yell, you can hear me then. It is an honor to be with you this afternoon for this conversation. So how was lunch? I hear you heard from my friend Hill Harper. He's always phenomenal. Was lunch good? Good. Hill is a good man. So I just heard someone's cell phone. That's a good reminder for me to say at this point. If you would, I just remembered to turn my own off. If you could turn off BlackBerries and cell phones so we don't interrupt the discussion. So here's the ground rules. We're going to go for about an hour and a half. Our distinguished panelists, who I'll introduce in a minute, we're going to talk for about 45 minutes or an hour or so, and then I'd like to open up for questions from the audience. Emphasis on question, not statements, but questions. A little bit before we go forward as to why this is so important to me personally. As a journalist, it's my job to cover what's going on around the world, and I take that seriously. Please know there are few issues I think more important in our society today than education of all of our children. It matters to me, certainly as a parent. It matters to me professionally. And it also matters to me on a very personal level. You see, long before I was ever Byron Pitts of 60 Minutes and CBS News, I was a kid born and raised in East Baltimore. My mother was a single parent. She had her first child at 17. She had me before she finished high school. I didn't learn to read until I was 12. I stuttered until I was 20. When I was diagnosed as functionally illiterate, one of the experts that my mother took me to see said, "Miss Pitts, I'm sorry, it's our diagnosis that your son Byron is mentally retarded, and we think he should be institutionalized." Fortunately for me, despite my mother's limited education, at that time she had a 10th grade education. She later went back to school, got a college degree, became a social worker. But at that time, with her limited education, she had tremendous faith. For all of my life, my mother has worn around her neck a small mustard seed. It's been her reminder, the daily scripture that says, if you have faith just the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it shall move, and nothing will be impossible. So I am a witness to the power of education. I'm clear about what can happen when children aren't educated, when they're cast aside, what that life can become. But I'm also mindful of what can happen when good people, from parents to educators to administrators, the people in this audience, give of themselves to tell a young child to tell a young black boy that, son, despite where you are right now, you can make it. And you demonstrate that in your words and your actions. So it's an honor to be with you today. We're going to begin our conversation, but first we're going to look at a videotape, which I had a chance to see earlier. It runs about 3 minutes. It is a powerful and sobering videotape that will set the stage for our conversation. It will give us the statistics. I would encourage, some of you might want to take notes, because the numbers are dead on and disturbing. Please take a look.
Drug boys dead, it's showtime. The streets don't give a damn. They're filled with such pollution. The kids don't stand a chance. We're trapped inside the matrix, forced to play our hand. We're filled with so much hatred. The kids don't stand a chance. I said the kids don't stand, the kids don't stand a chance. I said the kids don't stand, the kids don't stand a chance. Well, since I was planted at birth, I abandoned my old planet and I landed on Earth. As a kid, I never understood what I observed, and some of it was strange, but most of it disturbed me. Always in detention for the lack of my attention. You can call it deficit. Really, I just didn't listen, and I was always missing. The teacher's like, where is Bobby Simmons? But trying to get a record deal is all I can remember. It's funny, cause looking back on the past that I had, all my days in the streets trying to prove that I was bad, I still elevated to the level that I'm at. Still elevated to the level that I'm at. We're trapped inside the matrix, forced to play our hand. We're filled with so much hatred. The kids don't stand a chance. I said the kids don't stand, the kids don't stand a chance. I said the kids don't stand, the kids don't stand a chance.
Sometimes it's hard to grow while living in fear of the unknown. How can he ever give love when no love is in his heart? A child can barely sleep at night, too worried about tomorrow. And what if he holds, he drowns himself deep down in his sorrows. Will you run or will you share your life? Tell our stories a living strife. See it when we're given hope, that we know that we can grow.
We're trapped inside the matrix, forced to play our hand. We're filled with so much hatred. The kids don't stand a chance. I said the kids don't stand, the kids don't stand a chance. I said the kids don't stand, the kids don't stand a chance.
To my left, to your right, John Jackson, president of the Schott Foundation for Public Education. Next to him, Dr. James Williams, superintendent of Buffalo Public Schools. George Garrow, executive director, Concerned Black Men, the national executive director, George Garrow, Concerned Black Men. Dr. Gloria Crutchfield, task force leader for the Palm Beach Schools Black Male Task Force. Airick Leonard West, president, school board president, Kansas City, Missouri. And the person I would like to consider our resident expert this morning, the man who is living in the world that we're going to discuss, Mr. Kevin Sutton. Kevin is a senior at a local high school here in Tampa. He is an honor student, by choice, and he happens to be a captain and all-star of his football team. Thank you for that, because he is getting it done on the field in the classroom. So we're going to break this conversation down this way. We're going to talk for a bit on these areas, panelists. How bad is it? Where do we go from here? What do we do now? And tell us something we didn't know. And then we'll open up for discussion. We'll spend some time talking about the problem that we all know something about, and then go forward. But first, I'd like to start with you, John, if you would. Tell us something about you personally that connects to this issue, why it matters so much to you, in about a minute or so, and then we'll go through the panel that way.
I think it matters much in like the story that you shared. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, attended Frank L. Gillespie Elementary School, was forced to move with my father when I was 12 because my mother told me I was smelling myself, and she moved me to a south suburb, University Park, where he was living, and that's when I first recognized the disparities between what was happening in the inner city school and the suburban. I was fine in Chicago public schools, academic challenges in the suburban school. Consequently, I graduated with a 2.25 on a 5-point scale. This is long before getting my doctorate at Harvard, long before going to the University of Illinois Law School. My challenge is that after leaving high school, I went on to Xavier University, which is a historically black college in the South. As many of the HBCUs do, they accept the students not only with the 4.0s, but the 2.0s, and they educate them. I often say Harvard didn't have professors smart enough to teach me coming out of the system that I was in. So while I recognize that I've had the opportunity to learn, I also recognize that there are thousands of black males on the corners of Chicago if we just give them the opportunity that they can produce the results. So it's, in many respects, opportunities lost if we don't.
Dr. Williams.
Thank you, and I want to thank the council for taking on this task. I came from the good family, if you want to call that, mother, father. Mother was a school teacher, father was a minister. And in the South, that was middle class when I came along. I think I went to 6 different elementary schools because my father was a Methodist minister. We moved all over the country. I went to 2 different high schools in 2 different states. Started in Wilmington, North Carolina, graduated from Booker T. Washington in Norfolk. I think I had very good teachers at Booker T. Washington, predominantly black school. But everybody in that school taught English, taught us how to speak. But in my neighborhood, which was Berkeley, the hood, my father's church was there, 2 of us made it out of that community out of 36 African-American males. 22 of them are dead, overdose of drugs, died with heart attacks. And this has been an interest of mine for years because the problem with African-American males killing each other, 50% not graduating from high school, 17% going to college, 7% graduating, is an economic problem to us in this country. So I think it's something we should find solutions for. We don't need any more research.
George Garrow.
Well, I want to thank the council as well for this report. I think it's a great beginning, an aggressive beginning. And I think that for me, just personally, it's a legacy issue. I'm a black male, obviously, and we're talking about black males and the future of the black community. And in reality, we're talking the future of America. And those who have, which is most of us in this room, have that responsibility to ensure that those who have not, that we bridge that gap. And we all know just how large that gap has become between haves and have-nots. And black males, particularly young black males, find themselves at the bottom of that rung. From a legacy standpoint, I'm talking about being able to look behind me and see future black males succeeding and doing well. And they are the key to a future vibrant black community, which is, in my opinion, a key to a successful America. So if we're not able to do those things, we're really condemning not just black males, but ourselves to a certain fate that we're not going to want to see now or years from now.
Dr. Crutchfield.
Yes. I grew up in a traditional family, mother, father, brothers and sisters, and we all went to school. It was part of the expectation at home that you were going to complete school, you were going to get your work done. And I'll never forget, Fred Sanford would be on television calling his son a dummy. And my mom always reminded us, I don't raise dummies in my house. So the expectation was always there for us. In the high school that I attended, Lincoln Park Academy, Fort Pierce, Florida, we had queens and kings of prom. We had homecoming kings and queens. We had academicians, very good teachers, and we all were taught how to read, to write, to speak, as well as to behave. It was a much different world then. We were all educated and expected to go to the next level in some form or fashion. Today, the observation is that the academics and the standards that were there, because you had to be prepared if the opportunity arose for you to run through that door. Now that we have the opportunities, we don't have necessarily the expectation of success. And I think that has created an undereducated educational system where we have students who are not taught at the level they need to be taught, with the positive images there, and with all of the opportunities that we have. Unfortunately, if 3/4 of our students, African American males in particular, are in a remediation math or reading class, they will never catch up. They will never be able to be successful on the standards, the SAT, ACT that's presented before them, not because they don't have the ability, but because they don't have the equity and the preparation. So I think that, in my mind, only the educated are free. And therefore, I would like to see the kinds of changes made educationally and nationally that are necessary to go to that end.
Mr. West.
Thank you, Mr. Castley, for your leadership of the council. Thank you, Mr. Sutton, for leadership at your school. I do this for the young brothers in my neighborhood. I do this for Deshaun, who I've watched over the years as he has worked so hard to extricate himself from the influences that are constant presence in our neighborhood that would pull him into activities that he doesn't want to be a part of and I don't want for him either. And I do this for Michael, who finally graduated high school and who I've been working with week after week after week to try to put together scholarships so that he can find a way to afford college. And I do this for Damon, who by the time he turned 18 had already been incarcerated 4 times and still had a remaining ember of a desire for something greater for his life. Deshaun was shot and killed last summer. Michael was shot and killed this summer. We'll get the job done for Damon. That's why I do this.
Mr. Sutton.
Yeah, I'm a student in an inner city school here in Tampa, so like I started school in the same neighborhood in the inner city, and I attended a high school in the inner city. And I remember back in the first day of the 9th grade, me and my friends, a lot of my friends from the neighborhood, it was about, I'll say 20 of us, we all walked to school on the first day. And now as I'm going down the road now, I'm close to graduation, and I look around my school, it's only about, I'll say 3 or 4 of us left. The rest of them have dropped out or in GD programs, or some of them even in jail. So, but I came up in a single parent household and the expectations were high. So I just think every household should have high expectations for the black males to succeed in school. That's pretty much it.
We will get to solutions and what we should do, but I'd like to spend just a few moments, because I could hear people taking a breath when our last 2 speakers spoke. And so we can just spend a moment with how bad is it. so everyone is clear beyond the statistics. How bad is it? So if I could, I'd like to start with you, Airick Leonard West, and then feel free, panelists, to jump in at any point thereafter. How bad is it?
I appreciate that we started with the video because that describes the situation that we live with in my neighborhood in Kansas City, Missouri. A neighborhood where currently we see that the unemployment rate for African American males in our community has been before the recession, is worse during the recession, will continue post-recession unless we get serious about this. Double the unemployment rate for the rest of the metropolitan area. We live in a situation where my neighborhood, the young brothers are growing up, and more than 75% of the people that they encounter have never completed college. And so there's not that example. There's not that automatic expectation that Brother Sutton speaks to, that this is part of what is going to be your experience, because that's not the experience of the people that they're surrounded by. We live in a neighborhood where every single week we're losing at least one of our young black men. Every single week. And as a president of the school board, I find myself at entirely too many funerals mourning the lost opportunity to do the great work that inspires most of us in this room. That's what I see. That's what continues to challenge us as a community, is how much of a risk are we prepared to take to do the work that needs to be done. The research that some of the great people in this panel, in this room, have done demonstrates this is doable stuff. There's nothing impossible. The challenges are great. The sacrifices that will be necessary to correct some of these problems will have to be equally great.
John, you crunch numbers. That's part of what you guys do at the Schott Foundation. Do the numbers reflect how bad it is?
I think absolutely, and I think that's the brilliance of the council, Michael Kastler and others, focusing on this issue. I mean, this is something that the African American Latino community has been talking about for years. And in many respects, they're the yellow canaries for what we see happening across our country. So when we say that 47% of black males are graduating from high school per year, 47%. In New York City, which enrolls the largest number of black males, 28% with a Regents degree. And of the 28, if you look back to the 8th graders, only 9% of the 8th graders are proficient or above in 8th grade reading. Now, that's not just a African American problem, and I say a Latino problem because second to the bottom are Latino males. But it's a national problem, not for the future, but for today. You can't separate a 28% graduation rate in New York with the fact that 50% of black males are unemployed in New York City. You can't separate a 44% graduation rate in Chicago with the fact that you could pick up a paper and say 74 black shot in one particular weekend. So there's this link between education, criminal justice, education, and our economy, so much so that we're paying on both ends. One, we're paying because when they're not educated, they're not paying into the tax system, they're not paying into the social security system, the health system. And then we pay on the back end because we know that there's a correlation between educational attainment and incarceration. And we're paying to incarcerate them, which costs us more. Our economy can't grow under those constraints. And I see we're all suffering because of that today.
Please, any member of the panel can speak of it.
Well, this has been a problem for years. When I mentioned the data about my personal life, that was 1962. That's when I graduated from high school. Don't try to figure out my age.
I was computing.
But we did not keep statistics then, and we were not killing. Now, in Buffalo, New York, and John mentioned about New York State, we have the worst of African American graduating. The scary part is not of interest to anyone, in my opinion. In Buffalo, I have been to 18 funerals in 5 years of students being killed. And the people who killed them were African American also, mainly males. And so that's 36 or 38. 3 weeks ago, 3 blocks from my house, and I thought I lived in a good neighborhood in Buffalo. Person walked to the restaurant and shot 8 people. 4 killed, all black. 5 that were shot were black males. The person that's accused, black male. So the black on black crime, the economics that we're losing because you're not finishing high school, the taxes you're not paying because you're not working, with 1 million African Americans in jail, I'm being told, it is a major economic problem for all of us. And I think it should be at the top of the agenda of the President of the United States. Because if we don't fix this, we're not going to have a race. And on a personal note, I have twin daughters. They're dating white males. I'm not against that. But I asked them, I said, where are the black guys? They said, Daddy, the way you raised us, you wouldn't let them in the house.
Other members of the panel, how bad is it?
Well, I mean, it's bad. I'm using adjective to describe it, but it's bad because it's getting worse. In other words, what I'm seeing is the problem is almost growing exponentially. I mean, there's not a gradual increase in this problem. I mean, you can look back just 30 years. In 30 years ago, in most schools around the country, and this is a broad generalization, a significant portion of young black males were graduating from high school. I don't know exactly the statistics, but I could almost assure you that the graduation rate was north of 80%. And so this problem is growing exponentially. And the reason that it's growing exponentially is because, and I hope we're going to talk about solutions. We're going to talk about that at the end. But
we are.
Because we have not focused on the problem. You know, any problem that you have in your life, if you're going to solve it, you have to focus on that problem. You have to devise a specific solution for that problem. And we have not done that for a number of reasons. But as a society, we haven't done it. So our failure to acknowledge the problem and to focus on it and devise specific solutions for that population of young people to turn that problem around makes it even worse. Because, I mean, if you got a problem, it helps to know that you at least have a plan, a strategy, and you've begun to execute the plan and that strategy. And we have not done that. At least we have not done that broad-based across your various districts and across other areas of our society. So it's bad, and it's getting worse exponentially.
Devin?
Yes, I have something. If I think I could just use my school as an example again, because in the 9th grade, we started as a 4A classification and enrollment. But now, after 2 years of my high school, in my junior year, we went from a 4A to a 2A. That's over a half reduction. So I'm guessing that half of those kids are just out of school and on the street. So I think it's very bad, and there's room for improvement.
And the reason that I chose not to say anything until after I'd heard all of the voices of the black men is out of respect. It is time to hear the voices of the black men. And, excuse me. But I am emotional about this. When you see the black men dying around you, undereducated, I heard the doctor just say he has twin daughters. And his twin daughters are now dating across lines. Oh, thank you so much. But you'll have to forgive me because this is emotional. So the question becomes, about a dream deferred. What happens to that? Langston Hughes in the 1920s was talking about a dream deferred. Here we are, 2010. We know what happens to a dream deferred. It explodes. That is the last line of his poem. What happens to a dream deferred when it is not realized? Does it evaporate? Does it smell like rotten meat? But his last statement is, or does it simply explode? Mm-hmm. And it sounds as if, to me, hearing from the voices of the black men, that it is exploding. It is time to fix it. Period. Bottom line. Let's fix it. We know what the problem is. Let's fix it.
I see a few people have shed tears at this point. And let me say, if anyone here at this moment is uncomfortable, then that's a good thing. Because I would imagine any level of discomfort any of us may feel does not compare to the children that we're talking about. We're going to get to solutions in a bit, but talking more about, Doctor, what you just started on, do you have a sense of where things went wrong? Can you point to a moment in history when things began to turn? Anyone?
First of all, this education, public education, was not prepared or geared towards educating all children. Blacks were not in the equation, folks, and we have to understand that. Now I'm going to step out of line a little bit, and y'all might boo me, but I think one of the major problems that happened was 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education. And I remember when Thurgood Marshall and Earl Warren, and they said, if you all win this case, are you prepared to implement the recommendations? We haven't answered that question yet. Now, I'm not against desegregation, all those issues. I'm not against that. But I think the solution was all the ills were placed at the doorstep of the school system, public education. So the society ills have grown over the years, dealing with the social, emotional, and the academic needs of our children. And I think that's where we went wrong in dealing with this problem. The second issue is it's not of interest to people. When we talk about race, we have a tendency to stop talking, especially if it's a mixed audience, especially if whites are in the room. We have a tendency to stop talking. So then the African Americans will push back and not talk. But now we're seeing the results of those issues that's going to impact everybody in this room, because we don't know when that gun is going to be fired and it's going to hit one of us or one of our children, or they break in our homes. So I think it's a historical problem. We just feel the results of many years of neglect.
John, where do we go wrong? When do we go wrong?
I think, first of all, when we go wrong, when we believe that it's a problem that only impacts a certain community. You know, in Detroit, 27% of black males are graduating from high school, only 19% of white males. There are a fewer number of white males, but it's our problem. So there's clear data that indicates that regardless of race or ethnicity, we're 99.6% the same. In fact, there are more genes to explain the variance in our eye color than our racial or ethnic differences. So to the degree that we see any variance in educational performance, it's not the racial or ethnic differences, it's the social policies and social practices. So we have to begin to track, when do we shift the social policies and social practices? I tend to believe that Brown was a great thing. And Brown was a first down, not a touchdown. And to Dr. Williams' point, there had to be some implementation. Now, if you follow the implementation of Brown after the 1964 Civil Rights Act, after 1965 Elementary Secondary Education Act, there was a period in our country when we focused on implementing the civil rights laws and legislation that we began to see the achievement gap close. Look at the achievement gap during the 70s. It began to close. Then in the early 80s, there was a shift in how we approach civil rights at the federal level. And you begin to see the achievement gap open again, and it has been open ever since. So while it's bad, and while we recognize that there's a challenge, we also recognize that policy and practice can begin to shift the tides if we have the public will and the political will to take on the issue.
Okay. Let's stay there for a moment. Now, my takeaway when you said things began to change in the 80s, are you referring to the Reagan administration, or are you suggesting that it is it isn't race, it is sort of class to some degree, but it's more political, and somehow the Republicans are responsible?
I absolutely agree that it is a policy.
Oh, that was the question. That wasn't a statement. I was asking.
Absolutely. And there was definitely a shift during the Reagan administration in the approach on civil rights enforcement. There was definitely a shift on the approach on criminal justice and incarceration. In fact, you could see a 45-degree spike in the number of individuals being incarcerated during that administration because of the changes in law. So much of what we're seeing is, again, not just a race or ethnicity issue, but it's the mix of the social policies and social practices and the conditions that impact a racial or ethnic group that's more often than not to be at the bottom of so many of those social conditions where we need them to be at the top.
To his point, and it is a common discussion in our country about the role that politics plays, I'm struck by when each of you gave a personal story. It wasn't a Republican story, it wasn't a Democrat story, it wasn't a policy story. You each talked about your parental involvement, what your parents, whether it was a two-parent household or one-parent household, what the expectations were. Do you think that too much is made of politics and not enough is made of parental responsibility, family responsibility, community responsibility?
It's not an either or. It's an and. You talk about the 80s, for example. That's exactly what happened, and it was the Reagan administration. But what happened is that these things were made possible because of something else that happened in the early 80s. Crack. Crack happened. I'm an attorney as well, and I used to represent indigent defendants back, in the late 80s. And so what happened in the early 80s is the epidemic of crack hit many of our urban areas, or most of our urban areas, all of our urban areas. And that opened the door to mandatory minimums. It opened the door in Washington, D.C., where I live. There was an explosion from the early 80s to really the early 2000s. Of the number of judges, the number of prosecutors, the number of defense attorneys they had to defend young men, and it became a new industry. I mean, if you look at the number of judges that were sitting in 1980 versus the number of judges that are sitting now, I mean, it was just an explosion of judges. So it became an industry, and so if you go back. I mean, obviously, we've got to go back further than even Brown versus Board of Education. We're talking some systematic institutional racism in society. I know we don't want to deal with that, but that's reality. And so, and then if you talk about Brown versus Board, an effort to at least to make this adjustment in education, Brown versus Board, we didn't begin to even see the beginning of desegregation until the late 60s. People resisted that. So what we're seeing here is institutional racism and a lot of other things, gender, class issues that have perpetuated, we perpetuated them because of our inaction And then other forces, crack, happened in the early 80s, and then that exponential growth that I talked about, it just took off. The number of young men in prison, we still incarcerate more people than any other society on the face of the planet. And so we find ourselves now behind the 8 ball to such a degree that even people who believe it's all personal responsibility, even they are saying now we have to do something about it.
Airick, sir?
Yeah. You're about to find out why I'm very effective in the places where I'm invited back and why most places I'm not invited back. We're talking about this parent issue, and I get so tired of this. When I think about parenting, this was, actually, we've got educators in the room. Let's flip this around. This idea about teaching being a solo practice is one that most people will commonly hold as not best practice. So a teacher going in their classroom, shutting the door, and engaging in isolation, that's not what's in the best interest of the scholars that we serve. We know that when our educators come together and they work together for the best interest of our scholars, we see better results. I'm just going by, I'm not an educator by profession. I just go by what the data wonks tell me. I would challenge you to consider that the same is true, that anytime you hear somebody talking about a parenting issue in your community, what they're really saying is that as a community, you have failed to parent. This parenting was never designed to be an isolated practice. It was never designed to be an isolated practice. You think about why you were in this room, and it's most of us, it's not because your parents were there thumping you upside the head. It's because when you stepped out of line, there was somebody else on the block who was thumping you upside your head, and there was somebody else in the church who was stepping up to the plate. And so there was always this communal situation where we were prepared to do what it took to take care of the young people in our community. And so anytime I hear this, what about the parents issue? What about the parents issue? To me, that's a cop-out. That is a great opportunity for us to step out of being responsible for what is happening in our communities and outsource the obligations that each of us hold in equal share to a group of people who currently, frequently in our urban cores, don't have the capacity to carry that burden solo. And the job was never designed for them to do so. I want to make you uncomfortable right now. If you can identify the place in your community, wherever it is that you live around the country, if you can identify the place in your community that has the highest need, just kind of picture it in your mind. Once you have that in your mind, stand up. Think about the place in your community that has the highest, the greatest need. What is that place? What is that area where you know that our young people are struggling the most? Once you have that in your mind, stand up. Now, if that is not where you live, sit back down. We don't have a failure to parent that is nearly as strong as our failure to be community. Think about it.
Correct.
That's true.
And I concur with what Mr. West has said. It is community. It's just not one issue, multiple issues. Negative images on television. I think about BET, negative images, all of the negative words. I think about affirmative action. It was good for a lot of people. I think about Brown versus the Board of Education. Wonderful. Wonderful. But I also think about the results of what was said to me in 1982 by one of my professors at, not Florida A&M, by one of my schools at University of Florida in 1982. And basically what was said by Dr. Rod Davis, was that wait until the Latino population takes over in 20 years. He said that in one of our counseling classes. And he talked about the dynamics of biodiversity way back then. And basically, everything that he said was correct. Wait until the pendulum starts to swing on social issues and political issues. Wait until we start seeing that there are going to be other communities and ethnicities in America that are going to grow. And then we'll start seeing slavery by another name. We'll start seeing people interact differently toward each other. And he was absolutely right, because now what we have is a situation where it is so dire. It is so dire. And we're so all interconnected that if we don't fix the problem, none of us will survive. So we're all interconnected.
I have a question. Now, I must admit, I am not the sharpest knife in the drawer. And listening to the conversation thus far and talking about who, for lack of a better word, I'll say that the shareholders we've discussed, parents, the criminal justice system, politics, politicians. I'm struck, though, that in this room of educators, that we've yet to talk about educators and what they have or haven't done. So in our conversation, where do we go wrong? Where do you think we went wrong in the classroom, in the superintendent's office, in the principal's office, in math class?
Okay, since I'm the superintendent here.
Absolutely.
We did a lot of wrong things. Let's go back to 1964. Title I. Some of you wasn't born. Title I is a federal funded program to close the achievement gap between black and white students. Billions of dollars invested in Title I, came in under the Johnson administration. 2010, the gap is wider and more money. What happened in our profession? We changed the standards to get into this profession. We're turning out graduates out of our schools of higher education, my opinion, that are not prepared to teach students. From those graduates, we become superintendents, we become leaders, and some of us are not prepared or have the courage to do the right things, mainly for black kids. So we take a lot of the blame also, because we talk about P16, but we don't talk about change in higher education. We don't talk about change in teacher education. Now, another problem, when I came along, black teachers came out of historical black schools. Folks, they were prepared. Black teachers back then made sure we did the work with dignity, integrity, and respect. When you came out of A&T, Florida A&M, Grambling, those schools, in the only two schools that you could attend out of the area to work on your master's were Columbia and NYU in the South. And the teachers in high school in Virginia, in order to teach in high school, you had to have your master's. You did not walk out of the BS degree program and move into a high school classroom. So I think it's a combination of things. Higher ed can take a lot of the blame. We personally can take a lot of the blame, because I see black teachers today in Buffalo, in Dayton, Ohio, where I used to work, have forgotten where they came from and look at our children as second-class citizens. Those are some of the problems I think that we need to correct.
George, and then Airick, please.
Well, your educational institution is like any other institution in the society, and it's going to reflect the same types of challenges and difficulties that we have, attempting to bridge this gap and to ensure that we establish a foundation of fairness for everybody. If it's not happening in the criminal justice system, if it's not happening in the halls of Congress, it's not going to happen probably in our educational system unless we get this aggressive push by some, very courageous people. And that's I think this panel discussion is an indication that maybe the council and your districts around the country are prepared to do that. You need to be prepared to lead in many of these changes. You need to be looking at your school systems, and I know it's being done in some places, but you need to be looking at your school systems, and your best teachers need to be teaching in your poorest communities. And you all know that's not happening in many places because there's no cachet, working with the worst kids. You got to work harder. Your superintendent is not gonna. You are not being judged. You're not being given any credit for bringing somebody who's in the 9th grade from the reading at the 4th grade level to bringing them up to grade level. You're probably not being given a lot of credit with respect to that. So the whole paradigm has to change. If you look at anything that's happened in our country, any sort of real change that's moved us on the side of the positive continuum, is from brave people who've just done a paradigm shift. They've stepped out and said, here's the line. We're not going back there anymore. We're going to change. And we're going to defend that change to parents in the wealthy parts of our districts who are saying, why are you sending that money and focusing so much money on those black boys when my kids should be getting that money? You're going to have to be prepared to defend that. And most people don't want to do that. I'm hopeful that this will be a change and that you will want to do that.
Airick, sir, I know that there's a point you wanted to make. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, well, if I could ask whoever speaks next, if you could respond to what he just said, this notion about, if your job is to service your entire community, how do you, should you, and if so, how do you make that argument?
I'll speak directly to that as well, but please, Doctor.
I like to speak to what the attorney just said. And the reason I said that is because it sounds litigation to me. How would you allow a student to get to 4th grade and not be able to read? How did that happen? So you see, here we are with situations and scenarios that you're bringing up. You talked about the poorest teachers, the less qualified teachers having the struggling kids, the neediest students. How did that happen? Who's responsible for that in a school? Who's responsible for that in a school district? Who's responsible for that in a state? Who's responsible for that in a country? So you can start really drilling down from where things are going and who's responsible. But I go back to the fact that you cannot undereducate anyone and expect to have great results. You're just not going to get it. If you put students into less than standard curricular experiences, you're going to get less than stellar students, as well as you're going to get non-graduates, as well as you're going to get young people who end up not only dropping out but being pushed out, because we know that that situation occurs as well.
Mr. West.
2 questions. One was what's really happened with our education system. The other was how do we really sell this vision of focusing our attention on the needs of this particular group of scholars. I'll take the second one first, since that's what you asked about. How do we sell this vision? I know in my community, the young men of color, and in particular the young men who happen to be black, constitute a massive percentage of our school district. In our school district, we're close to 90% families of color. And the overwhelming bulk of that 90% are African-American families, with the next largest constituency being Latino. And so, from a policy perspective, I have an obligation to figure out how to make education work for all 17,000 scholars that our district serves. But I know rationally that I can't accomplish that if I am systematically failing one of our largest subgroups of those scholars.
Absolutely.
And so the policy, mandate that I take back into the community with me, and even though 90% of my population are families of color, in the boundaries of the school district, it's about 50-50 majority minority families. And the way I have to go back and sell that is that we can't get the job done for the small remainder of the district if we can't get the job done for this large subset of the district. And people have to understand, policy, and I'm an elected official, you have to make choices, you have to set priorities. And then you have to have the courage to stand by it, which leads to the second half, what's happened with education system. I'll take it from the political standpoint. I know teachers like rubrics. I'll give you a rubric. Go home, talk to your favorite elected official, and ask them who's to blame for what's going on in education. And I'll give you a A grade, a B grade, and a failing grade. Most of them will fail, probably all of them. Don't trust your political leaders. Ask them who's responsible. And if in their response they have not included themselves at all, they get a failing grade. If in their response, somewhere embedded in there, they've mentioned a bunch of other factors, but they've also included themselves, they get a B grade. If the first thing out of their mouths is, as an elected official, here's where I really haven't, gone as far as I could, and here's some strategies that we're really talking about. If the point that they begin with is, here's what I can do, here's the responsibility I can take as a so-called leader in this community, then you're really dealing with an A caliber. When you find out that the majority of your elected officials are going to fail that test, now you as a community have a job to do. And so I would argue that particularly in communities like mine, where over the 40-year history of the Kansas City, Missouri School District, we've now are on our 27th superintendent. I can promise you that on a 9-member board in a constituency of about 250,000 people, only 9 people in that city benefit from the constant revolving door of superintendents. This is a game. It's a game where politicians are unwilling to be responsible for the results that they are accountable for creating. And when you refuse to be responsible, now you got to find somebody else to be responsible. You got to be able to pass the buck, and we've passed the buck on to our superintendent since well before I was even born. Under my leadership, we will have a 10-year superintendency. And if you aren't prepared to hold your people accountable for that, then that will trickle down and create the type of non-accountability we see throughout the rest of the system. And we'll have superintendents who may be very capable, but who aren't given the opportunity to actually do the work our scholars demand.
Tevin, how old are you?
I'm 17 years old.
So, Tevin, you're 17 years old.
Yes, sir.
17 years old. Who do you hold responsible for? You said when you started out you had 20 your friends would go to school together. Now it's down to a handful. Who do you hold responsible for that dwindling number, and why?
I hold responsible society as a whole, because if the parents aren't able to support them, we should have the community involved in their lives, such as programs like Boys and Girls Club, so they can go to do that. Encourage them to do their homework and study after school, because if the school, that's not the whole picture. You have after school, which affects them too. So once they're out of school, they should have influences to continue to succeed.
How come you're so successful? Honor student, star athlete, handsome fellow?
We talked about that, Tevin. You remember that? We talked about that in the green room.
I've had a lot of role models and encouragement from my family. And in middle school, I took part in a service interact group, and my role model, Mr. Anderson,
Is he here? Is Mr. Anderson here?
No, I don't think
Oh,
he's
please go
here.
ahead. I'm sorry.
He's some fans.
He encouraged me to do well in middle school, so once I got to high school, he followed behind me and made sure my grades were up. And I thank my mom a lot too, because she was always behind me. She had a strong hand, and she made sure to keep.
That's right. I know that's right.
And she always stayed in my school, throughout my school career. So she always had a good relationship with all my teachers. So once I began to fall down, she always made sure they'll call her instantly, to make sure I get back on track. So involved with my mom being involved pretty much helped me.
I'll ask you one more question that hopefully will lead into the next part of our conversation. The people who you consider the people who helped get you to where you are now. Were they all black? Were they all male? Well, what's the makeup of that group?
They're mostly all black, but they weren't all male because my mom and my grandmother, my father wasn't really never in my life, so I just would thank my mom and my grandmother as the biggest influences.
Okay. The reason I asked about the issue of race, because we sort of talked about that some here, and I wanted to spend just a few minutes there, and I want to start that part of the conversation with something that Dr. Williams said when we were back in the green room in preparation, and hands were raised in the room. So you said that this issue of education, black men, quote, is not a race issue.
Mm-hmm.
Explain.
Because it's been existing for years. I think when you take the approach, it's a race issue, people stop. We have to sell this as an economic issue that's impacting this country. If you look at the average income of a high school dropout for life is $17,000. Short numbers. 2 years ago. If you look at a BS degree, it's $54,000. Now look at the amount of taxes not being paid. Look at having to take care of them if they're on welfare. Those are the people that's creating a lot of problems and killing black on black. If you go to jail, I'm told there are 1 million African Americans in jail. We went from slavery to jail. Look at how much it's costing. In New York City, I'm told it's $50,000 per person. So if the 1.2 million students graduated who dropped out last year, you're talking about pretty close to $350 billion over a lifetime of revenue or income that's not coming in to this country. So that's why we should look at it from an economic standpoint. Race is there because we're black.
Now, Dr. Crutchfield, when he made that point earlier, you about jumped across the table.
Yeah, Mr. West said.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Dr. Crutchfield, Dr. Crutchfield, and Mr. West.
They both did.
And Mr. West.
The reason I professionally disagreed with the doctor was because if you watch CNN and some of the other specials that occur, Latinos in America, blacks in America, you will find that highly educated African Americans with degrees, as well as Latinos, systematically are unemployed and or underemployed. If you just look at the truth of the matter, I think it's not an isolated, single variable, but being realistic, having had the female experience, but not the male experience, I know for a fact that race is alive and doing well. Now, to counter that, I say that to say this. You have a better probability of survival. I think about the salmon swimming upstream. You might start out with several millions, and when they tend to migrate back to the origin, how many actually make it up that stream? But the ones that are the fittest, sometimes luck plays a part of it, genetics, and so on and so forth. But the point of the matter is, you're more likely to have a better life if you are competitive and you're educated. And that's really the truth of the matter. Secondly, if you also have ingenuity and a skill set prepared for the world of work that someone really does need, and you've gotten some good counseling and good direction, many times from home, but you also have, and I think you did raise the question, is it all about race? There are some absolutely phenomenal people in every ethnicity who assist students on a daily basis. I have worked with them, and I continue to do so. But they will also tell you, when they speak to you honestly, that you have to do the right thing by people irrespective.
Mr.
Do
West?
the right thing.
Mr. West?
You know, I've never been a superintendent. Absolutely don't plan to be now that I know what the work is. And so I, respectfully, acknowledge that I have no idea what is appropriate from your role. But I know from my role as a public leader, as an elected official, as a community advocate, particularly in a constituency where half of my constituents are from the majority community, half are going to be from the minority community, and I still got enough votes to be the president. And I talk as crazy to them as I do to you. That what I really need the folks in my community to understand, particularly with the very low subscription rates from our majority families, is that all of us are caught up in this together. That the affairs of the African American community are inextricably intertwined with the affairs of the majority community, and the Latino community, and the Vietnamese, and the Hmong, and the other migrant communities that we serve. And so it runs counter to the demand that I bring to the work to gloss over some of the very real differences in experience and in daily practice that exist between the different communities. I have to be able to show folks that we must still not allow those differences to polarize us, but that we can find ways to have them be bridges and bring us together, and we have to collaborate. Again, I can't get elected if I can't figure out ways to collaborate, but I don't think we get there by glossing over the reality that our experiences, on different sides of Kansas City are dramatically different, and we have to highlight that and come together around a common vision for directly attacking the issues, that are killing our African American males.
We're going to open the floor up shortly for questions. I want to get to solutions, but one quick question, just one or the other. Do you see it more as a class issue, more as a race issue? Sean?
I think winning a race is not about race, but when you consider that there's a certain group that doesn't have gym shoes, it makes it about race. And I think that because our policies and practices perpetuate a certain group not having the resources needed in order to perform at their highest level, and the data shows that when they're given the resources, they perform. In our report, the places where black males perform the best are places where they're the smallest in number, where they can't be isolated or relegated to the under-resourced schools, North Dakota, Vermont. And in these places where they're given the opportunity, they even outperform many of the white males. So we perpetuate by not changing the systems and structures that doesn't give them the opportunity to learn. It continues to put this race piece in our face. Now, some would say, well, we just elected a black president, and there's no need for us to deal with it. We've come beyond that. But that's almost like saying after winning World War II, we have no reason to have an army anymore. We still have a battle to fight because there's a larger systemic challenge that needs to be addressed. So I think that the issue in and of itself is not about race or ethnicity, but the systems and the conditions makes it a race and ethnicity challenge.
And just either or, race or class, what do you think?
I want to go back to something Mr. West said earlier. The public policy issues that create problems. I want to talk specifically about the state I work in.
Can you do it in a minute or less?
Yes,
Okay.
I can do it in 30 seconds. In New York State, we force black kids out of school based on our policies. Passing X number of Regents exams. Everybody must pass those exams. So we make policies, for instance, social promotion. That was unheard of when I came along. Topics in math, general biology. We created all these watered down courses, as Dr. Crutchfield said. And that's failure. But who did it impact? African American students. In Washington, D.C., when I was a high school principal at Cardozo High School, they had a course called Topics in Math. I said, what is Topics in Math? Oh, this is a course for the black kids that can't pass algebra. General math. It's crazy.
Let's talk about, before we open the floor to questions, let's talk about solutions for a minute. And John, I'll start with you. Give us 3 things that these intelligent, committed educators could do in their school districts Monday morning?
Number one, we know what works. We know that if we can guarantee every child access to early education and ensure that they're literate by third grade. When someone was talking about the lawsuit, we are those who they would be suing because we're part of the system. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this room today. So year after year, we allow students to go through being born with no access to early education and ensuring that they're literate by third grade. And you can almost predict if they're not the path that they go on. There's a system. Second, when we know that the students are behind, there's no system for recovery. We can analyze that they're behind, but there needs to be some policy that says for every student that's 1 or 2 grade levels behind, that there is a student recovery plan, a 2 or 3 a year student recovery plan that gives them the additional academic support that may mean extended day learning, you don't get the summers off, the different mentoring supports like Tevin talked about. We know that mentoring works, but we won't pay for a mentor. We leave it to a volunteer system, but we will pay for a probationary officer each and every day. So we have better system to track those who are off track than to keep those who we want to keep on track. And then the third part is, as a part of the recovery plan, ensuring that they have the health checks that are necessary. We know that asthma, eyesight, and there are a number of health issues that prevent or serve as barriers to education. Ensuring that students who are 2 to 3 grade levels behind have those health checks in order. And then the final thing is ensuring that the curricula is aligned to ensure that they're in a college preparatory curricula so that they have, and some would say every child doesn't have to go to college, but every child when they get to 12th grade should have the opportunity to make that choice.
Amen, amen.
So if we...
Dr. Williams?
3 years ago, and a lot of them in this room got together with me, and we put together a document addressing this issue. A lot of superintendents that are in here, ex-superintendents, Franklin Smith, Carolyn Gaspard, Arlene Ackerman, Beverly Hall. And I agree with John. Every child should be required to have preschool and kindergarten. It should be mandated in the state. I think about 8.1% of our children are in preschool and kindergarten. The second thing is that we need a longer school day and a longer school year in our school system. Clap louder than that, please. I came out of school in 1962. I went to school 182 days, 6 hours a day. 2010, we have the same structures, but we've raised the standards. We need to look at restructuring teacher preparation. And we should develop rigorous courses for all students, not for a class of students. Eliminate the watered-down courses that we have put in place for black kids. Eliminate them from your course of study. And there are other recommendations, but I won't take up all the time to...
We'll go on the line. If you can add to that list that we have going now.
Yeah, just very briefly, I think that when you go back to your districts, there's going to be a lot of rhetoric about closing the achievement gap. And what I would say to you is that if you don't, you're in urban school districts across the country, you know that young black males are driving that achievement gap. If you don't have specific interventions for young black males, then you don't want to close the achievement gap. That's the reality. Because if you got this problem, you know young black males are driving the problem. How you gonna close the achievement gap if you don't develop specifics, solutions, and interventions for that group? There's no way to do it.
Dr. Crutchfield, give us some specifics.
Specifically, we pay athletes exorbitant amounts of money. Let us start respecting teaching and the teaching profession, preparing teachers the way they need to be prepared, and pay them. Let's pay the teachers what they deserve to be paid. And as a result, what we will do is bring that dignity and that status to that position. And also by making school relevant and rigorous for students. But you must have the teachers in place to get that done. And I think that once we start putting more money on entertainment and less on education, that is also where our problem started. So if we could reverse that, that certainly would be beneficial.
3 ideas, and I want to reiterate, none of these would cost additional money. None of these have to cost additional money. First, and most importantly, the one that trumps everything else, get personally invested in the lives of the scholars in your community. If you're not willing to do that, scratch everything else.
Specific, be specific. How do you do that?
Mentors, tutors, show up, be the neighbor, whatever. When Deshaun calls, says he missed the bus, give him a ride to school. The personal investment is going to trump so much, of trying to throw resources at it. In Kansas City, we've proven throwing resources does not work. People make a difference. You might want to consider that if it's not working in your community, it's probably because you aren't invested personally in a way that you could be that could make a difference. The other two, courageously target resources geographically. Do an analysis, figure out what are the areas of my community that are most underserved educationally, and as you identify those geographically and find the young men, target the resources for those young men of color in that area first. Geographic targeting. Then second, courageously target early childhood. I know it's been said, but we have to take a preventative approach. And we know that reaching the parents when they're still pregnant and when they've just given birth, anything in that 0 to 5 area, aggressively invest there, recognizing you may have to deprioritize other areas, but it'll be worth it.
Tevin, tell these grown folks something they can do Monday morning when they go to school.
Monday mornings, I would say when you go to school, you already know most schools already have dropout prevention and stuff like that. Like, influence it, encourage it more in schools. Like, just make sure once a kid has lost his way, make sure he finds his way back onto the path to success. And just always have a guiding hand. Like, for students that are failing in school, that almost downs them. Like, once they keep failing, if you're doing something, you're not having any success at it, you're not going to continue to want to do it. So just influence them to continue and help them gain success.
Questions from the audience? Yes, sir. And please, when you ask your questions, if you give us your name and where you're from, please.
Is it Mike?
Oh, there's a microphone right there, yes.
Good afternoon, lady and gentlemen. I'm Keith Johnson. I'm the president of the Detroit Federation of Teachers. And I know, Mr. Pitts, you said don't make a statement, but
I will interrupt you if you do.
Okay, so. All right. Step one in terms of solution, let us first stop accepting the abnormal as normal. Mr. Sutton up here should not be sitting here as the exception. He can and should be the rule, because there's no excuse for our young people and for us as a community looking at what's happening to our black men and saying,
Reverend
that's
Dr.
okay.
Bishop.
Okay, now here's my question for you,
yes,
Tevin, Mr. Sutton. Why? Why did you choose not to allow the pressures of the streets, the pressures from your peers, to deter you from your personal goals? And what are the excuses that your friends give for not doing what you're doing?
Thank you, sir.
Well, I would say it wasn't really a choice for me to succeed. Well, it's a I don't think it was a choice because my family made that priority number one to succeed in school, and education was number one. And I don't think there's any reason anyone coming up where I came up should be unsuccessful, because if I made it, anyone can. They had the same resources that I have and same opportunities.
What were their excuses?
Their excuses, I don't think there are excuses, but most of them would use not proper encouragement in the home.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Greetings. My name is Jamoka Hinton Hodgen. I'm from Oakland, California. I'm on the school board. And I just want to note that Tevin's comment sounds like an old school comment. When we talk about old school and new school a little bit, like, I didn't have a choice either. I'm 46. So this is not, we haven't lost a value in our community. So I want to thank you for bringing that up. Question quickly. And mainly I think to Mr. Jackson, but anyone, who are the other systems that we should be talking to? Because yes, we're talking to education, but folks live in communities, and who might you be talking to from a public health perspective that should also be supporting black males in their achievement?
Well, I think, the challenge is the school system as it is structured assumes that there are these partnerships that no longer exist. Partnerships with parents, when 70% of African American children are born out of wedlock, which develops a different family support structure in and of itself. Partnerships with churches. So in the past, where the churches were more engaged, now we have mega churches making a minor impact in communities with major issues. So that partnership doesn't exist. So it's almost as if the schools have to become the brokers for connecting parents and students with the resources in the communities, the health resources and all the rest. And that's the shift that has not necessarily occurred. One other piece is we have to begin to talk with those in the international communities who are doing this. I was in Toronto a couple of weeks ago, and their system, they're outperforming us. Finland is outperforming us, Singapore. And we asked them, well, what are you all doing? We come over here, we get your research, and we implement it. Where you don't. We have early child education for our students. We invest in supporting our teachers. They ask the question, well, what do you do with your bad teachers? We give them supports to be better. We don't get rid of them. We don't, close our schools. We figure out how to keep them open longer so that we can be of service to our communities. So, I think we just have to strengthen our communication.
We have about 10 minutes left, so we can keep our questions tight and our answers tight, please. Thanks. Yes, ma'am.
Gloria Butler Miller. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. Have any of you talked to those young men in our communities who have been failed by us? Have you engaged in a systematic way to ask them what we have not done to put them on the road to success? Is that a part of the solution?
Anyone?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
A case study, we look at students, especially those in our community that are killed, and try to look and see where did the system go wrong. By the time they get into the system of public education, there are many, many factors have occurred in these youngsters' lives. So we need, from cradle to jobs type of structures in our inner cities to deal with youngsters. The medical profession should be involved, along with the whole preschool piece and all of those things. But there are a combination of things that are disastrous in the lives of these youngsters. But one thing, remember, politically, people make money off failure.
Absolutely.
In public education. The worse you do, the more money they give you. And if we were successful and closed the prisons down, folks, look at the economics, the unemployment.
Mr. West.
The question is, have we systematically reached out to the young men that we failed? This August, I led an initiative in our school district where we knocked on every single door in the school district during the month of August. We knocked some 65,000 doors over the course of 5 weekends, knocked on every door of every parent in the district with specifically this vision for how do we create this engagement and how do we create a feedback loop. If you haven't knocked on every door in your neighborhood, strong, powerful, transformative.
And the response was?
Well, one of the immediate responses was more than 3,000 Kansas Cityans immediately signed up to volunteer to be mentors and tutors in the lives of our scholars.
Okay. Next question. That's something that can be done next week. Doesn't cost money, it sounds like. Yes, ma'am?
My question, I'm an educator from Columbus, Ohio. My question, though, is to any of the panelists, are we framing the problem in a different manner than we should? I heard today and from the panel that one of the reasons we talk about black males not being successful, they won't earn their money, they won't be able to pay taxes, they won't be able to be contributors to our society. Are we framing that so that those young people who are not successful believe that we think all they're good for is to pay into the system? Or should we think about this in terms of what we do to help them become productive so the focus is on the young people themselves, not on what they can contribute, even though I understand that message goes to the larger community because that's how people understand it.
Yes, sir.
But are we framing it incorrectly?
Please, yes, sir.
Yeah, it sort of goes with the previous question that was asked.
Right.
Young people essentially think, particularly young folks, to become disconnected, drop out of school, other networks. They think we don't care.
Right.
I mean, that's the bottom line. They think we don't care. And so you hear young people saying, I got to get mine because, you're not going to help me to get mine. And I'm out here on my own. And what they're really saying is that adults have failed them all along the way, from parents to teachers to the community at large to many of us in the middle-class community who've made it, who don't want to go back. This is what we spend our time in Concerned Black Men doing all the time, challenging people, particularly African-American males, to say, somebody helped you. How did you get here? What are you going to do? I mean, that's what we do.
Next question. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Sorry,
Go
I
ahead.
wanted to respond to the isolation. We have interacted with young African-American males and Latino males, and we asked them what was the problem, what are the problems? Isolation, not feeling connected to the environment, to the school. So what we have done on our faculty is we found men, and this is why we need more men in education, to really show the images that are out there. And we've said, this student belongs to you, this parent belongs to you. And we've had our teachers actually connect with students and parents to have that connectivity so they would feel part, and you will see a difference.
Yes, ma'am. Question?
Hi, my name's Ellen Bell, and I'm the president of the Sacramento City Unified School District Board in Sacramento, California, and I run a homeless youth organization in Sacramento. And what I'd like to know is really addressed to Mr. Sutton, and that is, what are 3 things that you think could build hope and resiliency for your peers?
I think 3 things would be a positive role model outside of athletes and rappers and stuff like that. And another would be a sense of belonging, because I've noticed a lot of my friends, like, once they got kicked out of school or something, like, they just be like, well, the school don't care about me, so why should I care about myself? So if nobody cares, why should I care? And they end up going down the wrong path and ending up outside of their home because their mom really give up on them and stuff. So, and the third one I would say is a safety net once they start feeling, just someone to help them stay, push them back onto the course the way they should be.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Audrey Hutchinson, and I'm the Director of Education for the National League of Cities. It's an organization that represents mayors and council members. Clearly, this is a problem of crisis proportion, and I wondered, in your respective communities, what efforts are there to engage mayors and council members to help really build the civic capacity and the sense of crisis around this issue?
Quick response, someone, please.
I guess I'm kind of crazy with mine. We're actually developing, we're in the middle of a mayoral race right now, a lot of candidates, so we're actually developing a grade card for all of our mayoral candidates that basically identifies all the issues where the city could be a powerful transformative partner in education in our city, and we'll publish the results. But there are many ways, many ways.
Yeah. Question?
Many ways.
Hi, my name is Karan Foltz. I'm from Memphis City Schools, and I'm a mother of 2 black boys. And something that I see as a parent is, what is our responsibility as higher ed and K through 12 educators to ensure that we do not equate behavioral issues with students' ability to learn, essentially labeling bad students as dumb students?
That's a big deal.
Anyone?
That's a big one.
That's a big one.
That's a big one. And you find it throughout the teaching corps, and you find it in the households as parents, calling their kids dumb. You find it in the grocery store. But higher ed, I think we should start there, because that's where we get our employees from, to look at the standards, the type of teachers we want. I want to see teachers coming in looking like professionals, not dressing like the kids. It's the little things. It's the little things that we have gotten away from that you all can help us with. Dignity, integrity, respect. Don't let them sit in your classrooms with the training teachers with their hats on and all of that. And that will carry, children look up to teachers, big time. So, but the question you asked is big. It's huge.
Yes, sir.
I don't have an answer directly.
I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am, please.
I think we need to have every teacher trained in undoing racism. I think that would be the way to go, number one. Number two, in the pre-K experience throughout the system, have read-alouds for the little people about themselves, their ethnicities, their cultures. Build cultural respect and knowledge, because we look at African Americans, we think when we teach, we start with slavery. Well, that was a history long before then. Same thing with the Latino communities. And we just should stop judging people and teach the child, teach to the human experience.
2 more questions.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
My name is Leslie Williams. I'm one of the administrators in the Dallas Independent School District. I've been part of that district for the last 35 years, worked with African American males for the majority of the years. But my question is, have any of y'all, have you really thought about a grassroots solution to this? Throughout all my years of experience and college at Prairie View, talking to brothers out of Texas Southern and other schools, we've sat down and talked about these issues since back in the 70s. And I'm to the point now, I'm tired of expecting anyone other than our community to take care of this problem. I don't depend on, even though the politicians, the clergy, the business community, they all should be doing these things that you all are saying. I agree with you. But I've been hearing this for over 30-something years.
Reverend Dr. Cardinal, I need a question there, please, Reverend.
Yeah, but my question is,
Yes.
have y'all thought about a grassroots issue, whereas the cousins, the male cousins, the uncles, the neighbors, and everyone help us with this solution and don't depend on other people?
Yes,
I mean, that's what we're doing. We're not waiting for anybody. We know that these other things need to arrive, but until they arrive, and maybe if they may never arrive, we do those things. Concerned Black Men has started a national mentoring program, CBM Cares. We're going to have that in about 4 or 5 cities within the next 60 days. We've got a best practices tutoring program. It's a coeducational. It's African American kids, boys and girls, but there are a healthy number of young boys in the classroom. And over the years, we've worked with these classes in this school, and tremendous results in terms of math scores and reading scores. And we're working with black men and other folks of goodwill, where we go and challenge them to let them know that it's all of our responsibility, and there is something you can do, even if you don't have the time or the energy. We can find something for you to do to help change that marker in your community.
John Jackson.
And I think there are a lot of grassroots efforts out there. One that's most well known is Jeffrey Canada. Start as a grassroots movement, but even after $50 million plus a year, they're only impacting 10,000 students. So it's going to take more than, even at our best effort, we're dealing with a systemic problem where we're losing tens of thousands of students. So it's going to take communicating grassroots with government and all the rest.
Yes, sir.
I'm Walt Rolfus, and I'm the superintendent of a school district. And I'm willing to take responsibility for the failure. However, I've had good help from the churches, and I've had good help from the 100 Black Men and other associations. But give me some examples of communities that have had outstanding results in what their programs might be. Tell me who I can contact as a good model as a school superintendent to deal with the problem of failing black students.
All right.
Wait.
If you guys want to pause for a second, that gives me an opportunity to, if I can. As I mentioned, I'm from Baltimore, and I'd like the superintendent of Baltimore Public Schools to come up. I know that everyone has success stories that they can talk about. So if Andres Alonso can come up for a second and quickly tell us what has worked in Baltimore. Okay.
You want to give him my mic? Oh, he's going to go there.
Gotta be
ready. Good afternoon. 3 years ago, for every black male who graduated from our schools, one dropped out. 2 days ago, we released the data on graduation and dropout rates for black males, and now for every child who drops out, 3 graduate. This happened.
How'd that happen? How'd you do that?
And we're not, we looked at the overall numbers. We had over 1,400 black males drop out in 2007. Roughly 500 dropped out last year. Unbelievably hard work. Many of the things that you all spoke about. It began with, for me, from the start, my first press conference when I was asked, how would you hold yourself accountable? I said, I will hold myself accountable in terms of the graduation rate and the dropout rate for African American males, because I knew what I was walking into. But it's taken a huge amount of community-wide effort where the conversation has constantly needed to be steered into what's the actionable item for you, since the conversation is always about what's not happening someplace else. The board has had to be extraordinarily coherent around difficult things such as closing schools that have functioned as dropout factories. We had to bring the churches and the community-based organizations to the table to do exactly what you just did. We've gone door to door, identifying the students who have dropped out in the previous year and essentially asking them to come back with new programs to accelerate their effort. Many types of programs. We use crises, such as, for example, an incident of violence in a school, to then bring volunteers on board. We went from the question of how are you possibly going to have 1,000 or 500 volunteers come into the schools to, how are we going to be able to use all the volunteers that are coming in? So huge progress. We went first with the general dropout rate 2 weeks ago and saw a 57% reduction in the dropout rate, and then we went deep on the African American male because we knew that sometimes the aggregate numbers are masking a deeper crisis. There is a dilemma at the heart of this question, though, and it was articulated in the discussion, which is that if schools are reflecting the social structure of the society, it becomes extremely difficult to turn around school institutions in pursuit of a goal that the society has not articulated as important. And part of what I articulated at the beginning, and if I have been successful in any way, is having the entire community embrace the question, is this question of, as communities, we have the graduation rates that we want.
Yes.
And if half of our kids are not graduating from schools, what does that say about us? That has been the work. We have a lot of room for growth, but the shift over 3 years is I think quite remarkable. We're listening to the students. They go door to door as well, and it's good work. So anybody who wants to. Anybody who wants to visit, you're welcome, and we're constantly visiting all the districts that we think are doing good work in order to learn. And I have to say that the work you're doing in Kansas City after decades of neglect, it's just remarkable. As in, you make an unbelievably hard decision right now. So,
if I can ask you a question, I'm sorry. Where are you from?
I'm originally from Cuba. I came to this country at the age of 12. So I have a comparative frame in terms of what's possible. I was educated in the New Jersey public schools. I taught emotionally disturbed 11 through 14-year-old self-contained students in Newark, New Jersey for 12 years. And at some point I found myself in administration and was lucky enough to be invited to come to Baltimore. And it's been a remarkable 3 years in terms of the ability to move certain issues that communities in Baltimore have had difficulty tackling over time.
I think it's sort of a teachable moment for all of us. As we've had this conversation about black boys and the suggestion on some levels that it takes black people doing things to help black children. Your success in Baltimore speaks to that every person with a brilliant mind has a responsibility and has something they can bring to the conversation. So thank you.
The
Yes, sir.
superintendent is key, but I think that the attention to the Napoleonic figure is problematic, because if the entire community somehow doesn't embrace a challenge, there's too much change in leadership in the superintendency for it to be sustainable.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
my work
Absolutely.
is about making sure that no matter what happens, the community embraces this as the fundamental question, because all you need to do is drive around Baltimore, see the boarded up houses, and see young men, not necessarily kids, in stoops in the middle of the day, and you know what the problems are. So it's about that kind of focus. Anyway, thank you for
sir.
the opportunity.
Thank you so much. We are just about out of time, but if we can, and the panelists will be here to talk to anyone afterwards. We can. I think we've heard a lot from Tevin, and his voice is so powerful for young people. We'd like to end the program today, though, with a videotape. It's from a young man, a student in the Atlanta school system. He went to a public high school in Atlanta. He was valedictorian, and I'm told, I've not seen this videotape, but he has a word for all of us that we can take home with us.
I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise. To quote the words of the famous writer and poet, Langston Hughes, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. I have been negatively stereotyped by society, enticed with drugs, overwhelmed with my mother's diagnosis with leukemia, robbed at gunpoint, and experienced the death of my brother. Despite attacks, splinters, and torn boards, still, I rise. I did not allow my personal problems to serve as excuses, because I understood each problem has a solution, and that solution lies within me. My faith in God and my ability to overcome adversity and make rational decisions has resulted in my academic success. I am committed to education, and I choose to do what is necessary, not what is popular. I stayed up until the wee hours of the morning completing assignments. I met required deadlines, and I embraced the challenges of several advanced placement courses. Without the grace of God, the nurturing of my parents, Paris Hardaway and Ernest Bridges, the support of my family, and the commitment of educators, I would not stand here today as an Anti-Defamation League unsung hero, a BTW Freedom Rider, a recipient of the prestigious Emory University M.L. King Ford Scholarship, a Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity and Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Scholar, a George W. Brumley Project Grad Scholar, and a recipient of the Gates Millennium Scholarship, which will cover all of my expenses for my undergraduate and graduate studies. Had I given up, I would not stand here today as a possessor of more than $1 million in scholarship funds. Had I given in, I will not stand before you today, honored and humbled, to be the first African-American male valedictorian of Booker T. Washington High School in more than a decade. However, Sharon and I are not the only success stories of Booker T. Washington High School Senior Academy, class of 2010. Please join me in saluting those who are making impact in healthcare and nutrition. Those who will blaze the paths in the fields of athletics and fine arts. Those who will tantalize our taste buds. Those who are journeying toward touching the future as educators. Those who will redefine the banking and finance industry. And those who will protect our nation to ensure a safer, stronger tomorrow. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, we rise into a daybreak that's wondrously clear. We rise, bringing the gifts that our ancestors gave. We are the hope. We are the dream. We rise. We rise. We rise.
We have our marching orders, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your time in Tampa. Thank you. Thank you, Doc. Thank you, brother.